Hey, good morning, everyone. Happy Tuesday morning, and welcome back to Morning Musings. My name is Don K. Preston. I am the president of Preterist Research Institute of Ardmore, Oklahoma. I appreciate you being with me, and I hope that my video yesterday, some words of encouragement, uh, I hope that they're helpful to you. And we have to continue to pray. We have to continue to work. We have to continue to sow the seeds of holiness and righteousness wherever we are at, no matter what happens. All right? We are continuing our examination of the Olivet Discourse. As I've shared with you, the general consensus concerning the discourse is that it's a discussion of two different subjects. Number one, the fall of Jerusalem in AD 70, and number two, the coming of the Lord at the end of the current Christian age. And so, we've been demonstrating and I've been sharing with you how when we look at the entire discourse, there's really no justification for believing that it's two different subjects. We've been focused for a good little while now on Matthew chapter 25, 1 to 13, and the parable of the coming of the bridegroom for the wedding, and the five wise, the five foolish virgins. Now listen, let me say this. As I've said very, very often, if Matthew chapter 25 is about AD 70, then all futurist eschatologies are basically false and falsified. Because I don't know of anyone, there may be somebody out there, but I don't know of anyone that takes the position that Matthew 25, 1 to 13 is a continuation of Jesus' discussion of his coming in AD 70. We are told that the continental divide, as one commentator called it, the continental divide of the Olivet Discourse is Matthew 24, 36. At that verse, we are told, Jesus changes the subject from the discussion of his coming in AD 70 to his coming at the end of the world, the end of time, the end of the Christian age. So, to reiterate, if it is true that Matthew 25, 1 to 13 can be demonstrated to be related to be fulfilled in AD 70, then guess what? The argument that the Olivet Discourse is to be divided goes out the window, and since the Olivet Discourse is Jesus' greatest discussion of eschatology, and it's the ground for the rest of the eschatology in the New Testament, basically that means all futurist eschatology goes up in flames. I have therefore been sharing with you for several weeks now that this motif of the wedding, the coming of the Lord for the wedding, is taken directly out of the Old Testament prophets concerning God's departure from Israel, God's divorce of Israel, and the death of Israel that occurred when she was carried off into Assyrian captivity in 721 BC. And yet God promised that in the last days he would remarry Israel in a new covenant, Hosea chapter 2 and verse 18 through verse 23. That would be the time of her restoration. Thus, the concept of the return of the Lord for the marriage, is related to the last days and the restoration of Israel. Not national restoration, not geopolitical restoration, but Israel reconstituted, redefined, recreated under the Messiah. Now, one of the passages that I've shared with you is Isaiah chapter 62. And I've given you a chain of passages, of dots to connect, if you please. Isaiah 62, 10 to 12, Matthew 16, 27 and 28, Matthew 25, 1 to 13. Because Isaiah chapter 62, 3 and following foretold the remarriage of God with Israel. Verses 10 to 12 posited that remarriage at the time of the coming of the Lord. Matthew 16, 27 and 28, which predicted the coming of the Lord in judgment and the kingdom. Does anyone doubt that the coming of the Lord for the remarriage is the time of the kingdom? No. That's look, folks, that's just irrefutable. So Isaiah 62 is the prediction of the coming of the Lord for the marriage, which is the time of the coming of the Lord for the kingdom. Matthew 16:27 is the time of the coming of the Lord in the judgment, citing Isaiah 62, and it's the time of the kingdom. And Matthew 16:28 puts it in that generation. Verily I say unto you, there are some standing here which shall not taste of death until they see the Son of Man coming in his kingdom. Well, since the coming of the Lord in Isaiah chapter 62 would be for the restoration of Israel, not geopolitical, not national, etc., but it would be for the restoration of Israel, the remarriage of Israel at the coming of the Lord in the kingdom. And since Matthew 16:27 and 28 directly cites Isaiah 62 and posits it in the first century, and since Matthew chapter 25, 1 to 13, is the coming of the Lord for the wedding at the time of the kingdom of heaven is like. You see, all of the constituent elements are exactly the same. Absolutely the same. Now, some people try to divide Matthew 16:27 and 28, and they say, well, Matthew 16:27, that's the judgment. Matthew 16:28, that's the coming of the kingdom. Matthew 16:27 is the end of the world. Matthew 16:28 is supposedly the day of Pentecost. Well, in the first place, the day of Pentecost doesn't work here. According to Mark chapter 8, a parallel passage with Matthew 16, there was a huge multitude present when Jesus uttered these words. And notice that Jesus said, verily I say unto you, there are some standing here. In other words, great big audience, great big crowd. And Jesus said that only some would live to see the kingdom come in power and great glory. Okay, Pentecost, and I'm really horrible on chronology, to be honest about it. I've seen calculations from a year and a half away to 6 months away. Doesn't really matter. Are we supposed to believe out of that huge audience that was present that day who heard Jesus say, there are some standing here that shall not taste of death until they see the Son of Man coming in his kingdom? We're supposed to believe that the majority of that vast audience, that big audience, passed away? Because, I mean, after all, Jesus' words are clear. Only some of that audience would live that long to see the day of Pentecost. No, the coming of the Son of Man in this text has to be sufficiently far off so that only some would live to see it. And oh, by the way, that eliminates the transfiguration as well. It's a little bit difficult to believe that only some of that large audience lived for seven more days. Don't you think? So once again, this coming of the Son of Man in the kingdom is sufficiently far removed from Jesus' speaking those words in Matthew 16:28 that it would allow for the death of the majority of those present that day, and thus leaving only some who would be alive to witness his coming in the kingdom. Well, again, that eliminates the transfiguration. It eliminates his resurrection. It eliminates Pentecost. And when we conflate Matthew 16:28 with verse 27 and realize that the coming of the Son of Man in judgment is the coming of the Son of Man in the kingdom, that likewise eliminates the transfiguration, although that was a vision of his second coming. But it eliminates his resurrection because the judgment did not occur at his resurrection. And it eliminates Pentecost because Pentecost was not the day of judgment. And remember, the grammar of Matthew 16:28, verily I say unto you, that little Greek term, amin lego humin, demands that verse 27 and 28 are united. Verse 28 emphasizes verse 27, and that means that Christ coming in his kingdom for the judgment was to be in that generation. And here's what that means. That means that since Christ's coming in judgment and in the kingdom of Matthew 16:27 and 28, since it is the coming of the Lord for the wedding of Isaiah 62, and the coming of the Lord in judgment, Isaiah 62, 10 to 12. So once again, to reiterate, that means Isaiah 62 points directly to Matthew 16:27 and 28 to be fulfilled in that generation. But the coming of the Lord for the wedding of Matthew chapter 25 is the coming of the Lord in the judgment and for the wedding of Matthew 16:27 and 28. But that was going to happen in Jesus' generation. Therefore, Matthew 25, 1 to 13 was going to happen in Jesus' coming in that generation. And that means the Olivet Discourse is not divided. Demanding, therefore, that futurist eschatology is false. Hey, listen, do not forget, okay? My January 3-book special, all right? That is, Elijah Has Come, a solution to Romans 11, 25 to 27. Listen, this is a truly unique book. If you don't automatically see the connections between Elijah, John as Elijah, and Romans 11, believe you me, the connections are there, they are powerful, and they are irrefutable. And guess what? John as Elijah also lies behind Matthew 25, 1 to 13. Okay, anyway, Elijah has come, AD 70, a shadow of the, quote, real end. And if you were to order all three of these books, Can You Believe Jesus Said This?, which is an exegesis of Matthew 16, 27, and 28. All right. If you ordered all three of them independently, okay, instead of taking advantage of my special offer for the month of January 2021, U.S. orders only, all right, you'd pay $16, $18 extra. But, once again, for January 2021, U.S. orders only, your total delivered price, postpaid. Now, look, I can't refund any shipping on this. This is postpaid. Your total delivered price, $30. Go to my website, donkpreston.com, BibleProphecy.com. Beautiful banner right up at the very top. Just click on it and order these three books. You will be absolutely glad that you did. Okay, tomorrow we're going to look deeper at this relationship between the coming of the Lord in judgment, the coming of the Lord in the kingdom, to demonstrate that Matthew 16, 27, and 28 cannot be divided temporally. And since they cannot be divided temporally, that means they are the same event as Matthew chapter 25, once again, proving the Olivet Discourse cannot be divided. I'll see you on the flip side.